Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Command Sergeant Major John Wayne Troxell, the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and welcome you all here today so we can talk about emerging warfighting domains. First off, let me tell you how or why these gentlemen are here. This week, I am conducting my International Defense Senior Enlisted Leader Conference. Normally, it's a Defense Senior Enlisted Leader Conference that, by my charter, I run twice a year. But because line of effort number 2 in the National Defense Strategy is really getting after assuring allies and attracting new partners, we've made it an international one, and we will have approximately 25 to 30 international partners, each who is the SEAC, or the Senior Enlisted Advisor to their Chief of Defense in their country. So throughout the rest of the week, you'll see some international partners here too. The reason we want to talk about emerging warfighting domains, traditionally we talk all the time about the traditional domains of air, ground, and maritime. But now when you look at the emerging domains of space and cyber and nuclear, which isn't necessarily an emerging domain, but we're really getting effort back into it, I felt it important that I brought in 3 gentlemen who serve as senior enlisted leaders for our combatant commands that get after that today. And the reason I do these press engagements is, one, it's a great training environment for myself and these senior enlisted leaders. But 2, when you talk about competitive advantages that we may have over potential adversaries, for 4 years I've been looking at the men and women that serve in the United States military, and I would say the greatest competitive advantage we have is in the human domain and how we train, educate, the experiences we provide that develops trust in the men and women. And when we have trust, we can empower. And when we empower, we can certainly do great things. And when it comes to our non-commissioned officer and petty officer corps, I might be a little biased, but I think that is our true competitive advantage over any adversary, where we can take an enlisted leader and they can understand commander's intent and priorities. They can apply agile and adaptive thinking and get after a problem or accomplish the mission or defeat a threat. So I'm showcasing 3 senior enlisted leaders today that operate in these emerging domains, and I want to introduce them to you. To my immediate left is the Command Senior Enlisted Leader of U.S. Strategic Command, Chief Master Sergeant Patrick McMahon. To my immediate right is the Command Senior Enlisted Leader of U.S. Cyber Command, Master Gunnery Sergeant Scott Stalker. And to our far right, our newest Command Senior Enlisted Leader of our newest combatant command, Chief Master Sergeant Roger Toberman of U.S. Space Command. So we're excited to be here today, and we'd like to hear from you, and we look forward to having a dialogue. So with that, we'll open it up to questions from anybody. Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir. I'm Ty Lopez with DOD News. The Department of Defense talks a lot about strength of its NCO backbone. Are there other nations, do you think, that are competitors in this that put equal amount of emphasis on NCOs and enlisted?
So absolutely. I think more and more over the past 4 years with these gentlemen's help and the other combatant command senior enlisted leaders, as well as our service senior enlisted leaders, we put an effort into developing this global network of senior enlisted leaders that can operate together and share best practices and lessons learned on development of non-commissioned officers and best practices of empowering non-commissioned officers and petty officers. And so when you look at some of our partners out there, especially in our Five Eyes, they do a great job of developing their NCOs. But then also other NATO nations out there. Just recently I was in Romania and Hungary, and both of those nations are doing very well at developing their NCOs. And I'd ask Master Gun Stalker to comment further on that, because you spend a lot of time traveling all over the world too.
Absolutely. First, if I may say, though, this is a monumental occasion to be here to say goodbye this week to the SEAC, John Wayne Troxell, 38 years. Really appreciate your service. So certainly on NSA side, we have Five Eyes partners that operate with us on a continued basis, both NCOs, officers, and their civilian counterparts. So this is nothing new. We've been doing this at NSA for about 67 years now. Cyber, though, we're 9 years old, Cyber Command, and it's something that we're just now getting started. And so most of my counterparts tend to be civilians or senior officers that I deal with in the Five Eyes. And so we don't have that yet, that NCO core yet, amongst all of our cyber partners. But within the Five Eyes community, we're doing pretty well, and that's something that we're continuing to expand and grow out a little more.
And I would just close out your question, sir, with saying a lot of people talk about the model of empowered mid-level leaders in management as being an American model. But I think as you look, it's an effective warfighting model, is that the more commanders can exercise their intent through empowered non-commissioned officers and petty officers at the operational and tactical level, the more they can expand their operational reach across their battle space. So thank you for the question. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Sandra Irwin with Space News. I wanted to ask Master Sergeant Troberman to talk about what you're going to be doing for U.S. Space Command, what issues are you going to be focusing on, and why do you think it's important for the enlisted forces to be to have a voice at U.S. Space Command?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, on 29 August, there we were and stood up the command, and our primary mission, as you know, is first to deter any threat that's in space or extends to space, to defend that domain when we need to develop the warfighters, which is really maybe to your point, to develop the warfighters for that domain, and then to deliver capabilities. And we rely heavily on that enlisted backbone, the technical skills of our airmen, soldiers, Marines, and sailors. So we're in it. I mean, we're standing up a space professional development courses at what has been in the past an Air Force institution, but that'll transfer over to U.S. Space Command, and we'll start to develop from day one, developing the kind of space-specific expertise that we need to accomplish all those missions. We're excited.
The training that you just mentioned that's being transferred, what organization is that?
It's the National Space, I'm drawing a blank, but it's our schoolhouse that's currently at Peterson. So we're working on curriculum, and they're working through all the details on that. We've experimented with some, experiment is probably the wrong word, but we've invited some coalition partners in the past to kind of see what we're doing. But we're training those space operators side by side, just like they'll be working in the field.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Travis Tritton with Bloomberg Government. I'd kind of like to follow up on that question for Toberman. What type of plans are you making, or how are you preparing for a U.S. Space Force if it is authorized this year, and will that affect some of the other stuff that you're working on?
So we're excited about it. I'm excited as an airman, of course. As a service, we're excited about the Space Force from a combatant command perspective. Different roles and responsibilities, right? So as a warfighting command, where we get those services from, where we get our personnel from, isn't as important to us as that they come ready and prepared. So we're excited about it. In many ways, from the combatant command side, it won't be any different getting a Space Force personnel than it is getting Air Force personnel or soldiers or what have you. So I think it's not going to make a lot of difference to us on the combatant command side, except that we're excited about it. I mean, to have those kind of specific skills and developing those warfighters from early on will give us a better selection of folks, better talent.
So I'm going to ask Chief McMahon from U.S. Strategic Command for his comments.
Sir, one of the things I'd offer too is whether we're talking about the creation or the establishment of a United States Space Force or the stand-up of an operational command, in this case of United States Space Command. I mean, the key recognition is the fact that space is a warfighting domain, and the recognition across across our government, across our services, is a really important piece to have. And so when we earlier talked about the development of our professionals, and this applies across the services, a recent example that occurred in U.S. Space Command, specifically the Air Force Space Command side of the house on the Man, Train, Equip, they just finished up with their first cadres of professionals that graduated from United States Air Force Warfare Center, specifically their weapons school. And that cadre will now, enlisted cadre professionals, to then subsequently be able to train and advance the ball really to get after these warfighting competencies. And so I think that recognition in itself is really, really important. And so whereas you sit there from the stand-up of a separate department, it allows you to focus on the manning, the training, and the equipping, so the organizational piece. And then what allows Chief Toberman and his team to do is really focusing on that warfighter piece. And the reason both those things are important, because it ultimately comes down to the fact that you have to look at the world through a threat-based lens. And the recognition of that warfighting domain is because you look at some adversaries and how they're trying to erode the advantage specifically in space. And I think there's value to just kind of focusing on that. So.
I'll go, yes, ma'am.
Hi there. Lauren Meyer with Washington Times. For both you, Mr. McMahon and Mr. Toberman, the Congress is getting ready to vote on the NDAA, and Space Force or Space Corps has been something that has held up negotiations. Have you guys worked with lawmakers at all to get across some of your priorities for this potential force into the final bill?
So I haven't personally. I've spent some time with the planning team here and offered some recommendations, mostly in the initial makeup of the planning team, right, to make sure that we had the right perspectives and diversity of thought and experiences in what would go into the plan. The specifics of that plan, we've kind of been letting the team handle and work with the Hill. I think when we get told go, we're ready. It's going to happen fast. We're excited about it. And I think we've got the people that we need in the places that we need to be able to move with speed, but to still move smartly and paying attention to potential blind spots, et cetera. So I've had I would say a fair amount of input into that, but the specifics kind of stay back and say, hey, you're the team. We've put you together for a reason. Now go and do great things.
Go ahead.
And ma'am, I would just simply offer from, I'll just kind of paraphrase my previous commander, General Hyten, when he was when space operations was part of his portfolio, part of his unified command plan responsibilities. He talked about, he goes, there's one person in our command, United States Strategic Command, that's focusing on the United States Space Force or Space Corps, and that was him. For the rest of us in this command, his direction and his intent was focusing on the stand-up and the establishment of United States Operational Command, that is United States Space Command. So as you sat there, we, once again, as a department, we've been doing space and space operations for a long time, but it really was the significance of elevating that to get after that operational and warfighting domain. So our clear focus was on that piece, that operational piece that is in that combatant command.
Go ahead, sir.
Thanks for your time. Dan Lamothe with the Washington Post. Elaborating on the Space Force issues, can you provide us an update with where you stand with recommendations or decisions that have been made as far as how it will work when you start cross-decking people into a new service, if that comes to be, uniforms, rank structure, all of that kind of stuff?
So I'll take that one on. So right now we are focused on this operational command known as U.S. Space Command, and Chief McMahon said it best. Space is one of the most contested warfighting domains that we have, and it's something that we could rapidly have a competitive or comparative advantage erode. So we have to put focus back into it as an operational command, hence U.S. Space Command. As we continue to move forward with the stand-up of U.S. Space Command, at a certain point, we will start going after this U.S. Space Force or U.S. Space Corps and how it will look right now. The key thing right now is to make sure that we can compete, we can respond and do the things we need to do in space, hence standing up this operational command. And you got any comments that you'd like to add?
SEAC only, I think really what we've already said. So we're waiting to see what that language is going to be. I don't know what it is. I haven't seen it. We'll be given our go-do. We're excited and we're ready, but that readiness is really in the kind of getting postured and prepared. So when we're said, hey, this is specifically what we're being tasked to do, that we can get after it quickly. So things like uniforms, and it's not currently one of my priorities, although they'll look good, I'm sure.
Okay, ma'am, I'll go to you, and then you go ahead.
Megan Myers, Military Times. There's been a lot of discussion with cyber warriors that it's hard to get them trained up and in the right jobs to actually use their skills without moving them around for another needs of their respective service. Is there, or are there any changes to personnel systems that you would like to see or that you've recommended that would help support those cyber expertise? And is space also going to have the same issue where you have people who are highly technical, but then they have to move over here to fulfill this, this requirement, or they have to get promoted, and then their management, and they're not doing the technical things that they're so good at.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, so retention is a challenge that we face in Cyber Command and with our cyber workforce. And what we found is there's a lot of factors to keeping that talent in and keeping them on their mission. And so we have the services offer certain bonuses up to $90,000 in some cases. And they also offer special duty assignment pay per month up to $1,500 a month. But what we found is with all of that, you're going to keep in manpower, but not necessarily talent. And so we've got to look at our high-end talent, our top 25%. What are the things and what are the things that keep them in? And more often than not, when I talk to them, they want to have stability. They want to do something that's important and hard. So we believe that if you're a cyber operator, ethically and within the law, the most challenging targets you can face are in Cyber Command and the National Security Agency. So we really focus on the job that they have to do, not so much here's more money, we'll keep you in, that sort of thing, because these individuals, especially our top talent, they have options. They have a lot of options. They can certainly transition and come out here in D.C. and make an awful lot of money. We want them to know that what they're doing is relevant. It's certainly impacted in line with the NDS, the National Defense Strategy, and the SecDef's guidance. But when it comes to targets like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and violent extremist operations, on a daily basis, they're employed, they're working hard, and that's what they want to be doing. They do not want to, more often than not, and this is kind of general, they don't want to be put out and to do, for lack of a better term, working at the gym or something like that. They want to be on mission, doing their job, and I would say that's probably the same in most domains. They want to do the job that they came in for.
Toby, you want to talk about from the
Well, I'd
space
just say from a space perspective, I mean, there's never been a better time to be in this business. So getting people excited about space isn't one of our current challenges. People are really excited. They're asking all the time. They want in. They want to be a part of it. And so I'm not too concerned with retention, certainly not in the short term. There's just so much work to do, and it's such an exciting business to be in right now that we've got lots of folks ready to step up and help us out.
Megan, you bring up a great point, and I think across the services, we have to make sure that we're really doing a good talent management on these critical skills here. And I will tell you, most of these high-end warriors like cyber and space, and Master Gun said it best, they want to make sure that what they're doing is having an impact, that they belong to a team that is cohesive, and they know that they're a valued member of that team, and then finally that their families are being taken care of. They're at a place they want to serve, and they're comfortable doing it. So more and more as we move forward and we look at these critical skills, we have to be in the talent management business, as opposed to potentially a personnel management business. You want to add anything, since all three of us said something?
No, I would, but that really is, right? I mean, you sit there, and what the CX actually talking about is across the force, right, across our joint force, is how do you sit there and recognize that the foundation of our advantage is our people? And how do you sit there? And so if we're going to sit there and poll every one of us and go, hey, why did you join or why did you choose to serve? You may have varied amount of different reasons. I would ask every one of us, if you said, why do we stay? It typically falls into three bins. It's meaning, it's purpose, and it's value. And so why do our service members stay? Because of meaning, purpose, and value. And I just fundamentally believe in my heart of hearts that people want to be challenged with difficult tasks. And so when you look at the enterprise that's represented across our joint force and representing these domains of cyber and space, I feel like I was doing space before space was cool. And you sit there and see the level of talent getting after these kind of things, and it's really, really important. And so once again, to the point, our service members have options. So holistically and comprehensively, how do we sit there and get after that? And sometimes, it is about, hey, we are on the top of our game. We're the best force on the planet. So probably now's the time to challenge our assumptions and make it go forward, because as you hear in the National Military Strategy from the chairman, right, he talks about our ability to continue to outthink our adversaries, and I think we all play a role in that.
Go ahead, sir.
Tony Capaccio with Bloomberg. I have a couple questions on hard and difficult tasks you guys are working on now. To what extent are enlisted personnel involved in the Cyber Command's contributions to monitoring Russian interference in the 2020 election? In North Korea, the world is now kind of starting to focus again on whether there'll be a Christmas launch of some kind. To what extent are enlisted personnel manning the monitors that feed, watch for SBIRS feeds or Defense Support Program satellite feeds? Give us a sense of enlisted roles in those two difficult real-world missions right now.
I could not be more happy that you asked that, sir. So
Question about uniforms?
you can go there too if you want. But what I'll tell you operationally is we learned an awful lot from the 2018 midterm elections. And the majority, the overwhelming majority of that workforce was enlisted. So whether or not it's the 2020 elections and how we're preparing for that, we are absolutely fully focused. The SecDef has given that as a task for us as our #1 priority, both at NSA and Cyber Command. So if you take NSA, for example, our NCOs, they're providing that insight, understanding what the adversary is doing so that we can see, characterize, and understand, and then give that intelligence to Cyber Command so that we can harden our targets. We can work with state and local governments because it's important. Obviously, elections are done at the state and local level through Homeland Security, through FBI, but through all of those phases and through all those steps, most of the workforce is going to be enlisted members. And I was just out at Air Force Cyber. They were the service component that was really focused on this in 2018. Did an absolute phenomenal job. Everyone that was briefing me was E6, E5, and so on and so forth. Those are the people on a daily basis that are on the keyboard that are doing the operations. And so it should be no surprise that as we look at 2020 or follow-on elections, your NCOs, your enlisted members, are going to be really, really in deep in this mission set.
Can I ask, what's the experience level? We're talking like 2 or 3 or 4 year vets, or are you getting a lot of new recruits through getting in that position, doing it too?
A little of both. Each service has a different business model. Obviously, in my service specifically, we tend to have a more youth-based organization. Air Force has a more senior rank system, and so that allows us to have someone who's been doing this a lot longer. But, you know, like I said, next year will be 10 years for Cyber Command, and so no one has, 20 or 30 years experience in this domain. NSA has obviously been working in cyberspace and doing things as part of our mission to collect foreign signals intelligence, but within Cyber Command, most of the time, people have been there one tour, but we're starting now to see repetitive tours. We're starting now to see folks that have left. They went out and did something in the operating forces or a different assignment, and then they've come back. And that skill set that they've learned, that maturity they have, we bring them, put them in a leadership position. Oftentimes you've got to get what we'll call re-greened because it's a domain that evolves quickly, right? You have an iPhone 11 today, it's already out of date. And so you have to really evolve with this domain, understand what the challenge is, where our adversaries are looking at. But when it comes to elections, Russia's not the only area we're looking at. Certainly China, we saw what they've done with information operations as related to Hong Kong. We know what they're doing with their Muslim internment camps and that sort of thing. And so they have a lot of experience disinformation, but also making sure information doesn't get out. And Iran as well, as you read about recently, they were able to shut off, if you will, their internet. And so all of the adversaries in the National Defense Strategy are who we look at when it comes to election security. And I can assure you, those individuals that are on the keyboard doing the mission more often than not are young NCOs.
Okay. Sir, North Korea question?
Yes, sir. I would start out with the North Korea thing. When you look with respect to your question on North Korea, we're absolutely in the right space right now. And what I mean by that is it's still in diplomatic channels. So at the highest level of national leadership, right, and our policymakers, they're still leading the way in diplomacy, and I think that's really, really important. From a military dimension, or more specifically related to the United States Strategic Command, fully prepared and fully ready. I mean, if I want to introduce you to the most squared-away missile warning controller on the planet, it's a Staff Sergeant, Marine Corps Staff Sergeant working on our Global Operations Center. And so as you look across the force, we have about 150,000 forces assigned to United States Strategic Command, of which 80% are enlisted. And they are fully prepared. You look across our priorities, our command priorities, above all else, strategic deterrence. Decisive response is our #2 priority. And the #3 and most important priority I would offer up or contend is the fact that a combat-ready force that's trained and resilient. And so, like I said, we have strategic deterrence submarines underway right now with about a crew of 150, 160. And there is E3s, E4s, E5s on those, mid-tier petty officers in this case, that are eye-watering because of the competence and how they've honed their craft over time. So from a perspective for us, we're sitting there completely ready as we always are, 365 days a year, 24/7. So
I guess I was thinking of this, men and women monitoring the SBIRS feeds and looking over Asia, kind of monitoring for potential missile launches.
I'll just be specific. There's nothing coming off the pen that our missile warning controllers are not going to see.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead, sir.
Scott Masiota with Federal News Network. This sort of actually builds off Tony's question a little bit. all of your domains are getting a lot more money and attention, and they're complex domains. They're not like the domains that we were fighting in Korea or Vietnam. So how's the role of enlisted personnel changing in terms of education now, in terms of prerequisites that they need, in terms of what their career will look like compared to 40 years ago? Now you're in these new domains.
So I'll answer from a general perspective, and then I'll ask these gentlemen for their specific to their area of expertise. So ever since we started professionalizing our non-commissioned officer and petty officer corps, it wasn't that long ago in Vietnam we were a conscription kind of force. But when we established our non-commissioned officer and petty officer education systems, it has continued to grow and develop, and it's continued to take off. And as the operational domains have continued to change and mature, the role of the non-commissioned officer and petty officer has continued to grow. And you look at ever since 9/11 and how the role of the NCO and petty officer has continued to grow in combat, we realized that the more effort we put in there to develop our NCOs, the better off we were going to be. So it's through training, it's through an education system that gets them to understand at the operational and strategic level, even though they operate at the tactical level. It's through the experiences in terms of assignments and operational deployments and stuff like that. And all of that put together, as I mentioned before, builds trust. Now within that, there's some kind of certification, either a formal or informal certification process to develop that trust. And once we have trust and you empower your enlisted, again, you expand the commander's operational reach regardless of what warfighting domain it's in. And we've seen that across the board in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, especially Iraq and Afghanistan since 2001 and 2003 in both of those theaters as we move forward. And certainly in Syria, we've seen it. So I'll ask you, I'll start with you, Patrick, to kind of talk from your lens.
No, I would offer one of the greatest advantages from my perspective is the all-volunteer force. And to the CX point, you see how the enlisted force specifically has been professionalized over time. And whereas, 4 or 5 decades ago, our roles and responsibilities would be clearly different than what we are today. And so one of the things for us is, and I think it permeates across the force, one of the things Secretary of Defense Esper talked about, one of his initial rollout, he was like, how do we sit there and power down decision-making to our lowest capable level, right? So what does that mean for us? It means disciplined initiative. And what's the value of that? And the value of that is it builds trust and confidence. As we further empower both our non-commissioned officers and our petty officers, this is good for our force, and it's good before our force because it's about, we talk a lot about the national defense strategy and our ability to expand our competitive space. Our greatest military advantage are people. So the further you can empower our people, the better. That's how I take it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I just had an opportunity to spend a day with the Joint Enlisted Curriculum Conference down in Suffolk, Virginia, run by the J7 here in the Joint Staff. And so I talked to them about that specifically, and how I thought about it is, just as if we were doing a ground domain, air, sea, you've got to start with the basics first. You've got to be a basic infantryman. You have understand of basic cyber hygiene. And the first thing I wanted them to realize is when you log in your computer in the morning, you've got to have a different mindset. It's no longer an administrative function. You're literally on something that has warfighting capabilities. If an individual were to click on a wrong link, you can shut a system down for an awful long time. You can certainly become compromised. So as we've looked at the joint PME, my comments to them were start with the basics, those fundamentals, and then understand you've got to up that through the rank system and experiences. And then there's an echelon of cyber operators who are going to have to do probably a little bit different joint training because they are going to be the ones that are doing this on a daily basis. But for the majority of the force that aren't going to be on the keyboard, penetrating networks, defending our networks, so on and so forth, they've got to have that basic understanding of what cyber is and how you can literally shut down a network by poor actions. So getting them to understand that basic cyber hygiene is key.
Go ahead, Toby.
Sir, I think what's really interesting is that the raw material that we're getting from America has never been more incredible. And in particular, in these emerging domains, the agility, we need the connectedness, we need the ability to communicate in all domains simultaneously. This is young people in our nation. And so it's really about getting that great product to start with, and then not changing it, but unleashing it through training and through discipline and rigor and everything that we're doing. And we couldn't be in a better position. I mean, they're coming to us with raw materials that we certainly didn't have when we were their age. So to me, the digital natives that are coming into the military today are exactly the warfighters that we need for the future. And it's more about figuring out how to unleash the talent and capability that's within them than it is kind of teaching them things, if you will.
Go ahead, sir.
If I could follow up on that. Do you want to do a follow-up? Kind of goes to that point, and retention, actually. You talked about them coming in already with higher skill sets, but right now you have recruitment issues because of a strong economy. What challenges do you see in terms of recruitment, of inflow of those skilled digital natives, as you call them, coming into your highly specialized commands? Because by the time, in order to bring in the right skill sets going in as recruits, they have to be at a certain level, wouldn't they?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think regardless, I think sometimes we look at this in an old lens, right? Levels of education, et cetera, instead of the material and talent that's within them. So I don't worry that they're not coming in at the right level. I think it's exciting, especially in these fields. These are exciting times to get opportunities to serve your country in these kind of unique and special ways. So at least right now, I don't want to speak for cyber. I'm assuming that Master Guns will back me on this, but certainly in space, man, they're just excited to be a part of it and get that opportunity to not just serve their country, but to serve their country and do something really neat.
Yeah, absolutely. We couldn't be more excited on a daily basis. We have a saying there, thank God it's Monday. That's really the mindset. Bringing in talent to date hasn't been the challenge. It is retaining that talent. So we've got to look at creative ways working with the services so that we can keep that talent in. I've offered the idea that we've got to have some flexibility in a system that was built several decades ago, so that if you have someone who's really doing amazing work, maybe they can stay within Cyber Command for an extra year or two. And so we're looking at that. We're working with the services on that. But right now, recruitment in the domain that I operate in, both in NSA and Cyber Command, has not been that great challenge that we expect.
Go ahead, Patrick.
And the one thing I would offer, just from a strategic command perspective, one of the roles and responsibilities that was taken on last year is to be the Department of Defense lead for nuclear command and control and communications. And so, I would contend that U.S. Strategic Command is kind of the epicenter for intellectual thought with respect to strategic deterrence. And so with that being said, how do you sit there and have a talent pool, if you will, both from a service member perspective as well as from civilian talent coming in? And that's something we're working really, really hard with, both out at Offutt Air Force Base and just kind of the broader portfolio, because it really is about acquiring the right talents, because integrated strategic deterrence is not something you flip on a switch at the end of a campaign. It's something that you have to actually bake in across every level, really to the prevention piece of going to conflict. And so it's something as a nation, quite frankly, we're really, really good about, 3+ decades ago, and something that, like many things at the end of the Cold War, is atrophied, but that's something we're really, really focused on. So it is working with academia, working with think tanks, working for all this thing, and it broadly is, how do you bring in the right talent to serve? And the good news is, and I would offer for the domains we're talking about here in the mission sets, it's very, very exciting, like I said, because it's very difficult and very challenging, and once again, I believe that people want to work on hard problems.
Now, I'll finish this one off by, across the force, in terms of retention, the key reason people stay in isn't so much monetary reasons. Again, they're part of something bigger than themselves. They see themselves as a valued member of the team, and they're part of an institution that takes care of them and their family. And as the world continues to change, where we've gone from counterinsurgency to where we now have this long-term power competition, and we also have these rogue nations doing the kind of things that we've discussed here, and certainly still the counterterrorism fight, engaged leaders will be the ones that keep people on the team. And I'll give you a quick example here. I was visiting an organization a couple years ago, And this organization was doing a lot of things in the European theater in terms of partnering. They were in multiple countries out there as we continued to work through NATO to kind of deter Russia and everything. And I couldn't believe all the opportunities the young men and women were getting in terms of not only traveling and training, but how much they were doing with other partners. And when I sat down to talk to the senior leadership, they said, well, this is all good and everything, but we feel like we're missing out because we're not in Iraq or Afghanistan. And I thought to myself, we're a force back then where we were less than 25,000 in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. The majority of the force was doing deterrence, and you know, China and Russia were the emerging threats that we really had to get after, certainly in these emerging warfighting domains. And my point, if we have leaders that are stuck in the past and they're not focused on the future and they're not getting excited like these young people want to be excited, then certainly we're providing an opportunity for people to exit and leave. So in my opinion, in almost 38 years experience and 4 years as a SEAC, engaged leadership will fix any of the challenges we have, certainly at the tactical level and certainly when it comes to keeping talent in our force. Okay, so ma'am, let me go to you way in the rear there. Thank you.
Thank you. So speaking about the international piece, could you talk a little bit about that interface, how that will fit together? Will there be like an introductory course when international partners come in, and will there be a formalized agreement that kind of binds everybody together? What's expected of them, what they're going to...
So we have many domains or many events around the world that we do with internationals. You know, the NATO Allied Command Operations Senior Enlisted Leader runs the International Senior Enlisted Seminar. That is an annual event that is conducted at the George C. Marshall Center. That brings in a lot of NATO allies, senior enlisted leaders, but has expanded over the years. That has brought in not only more U.S. Combatant Command senior enlisted leaders, but also other nations outside of the EUCOM or NATO area of responsibility. When we come in, it's all about building a team. And you know, when you're trying to build a team, especially with internationals, there's more art to that than science. And so it's about trust and building that and everything. And in the end, when we do these kinds of events, for instance, I run the Keystone Command Senior Enlisted Leader course, which is the enlisted equivalent to the General Officer, Flag Officer Capstone course. And every course, we have 5I students in there. And they are bound to the same curriculum as the U.S. students. But more importantly, these gentlemen here all serve as senior mentors in that course. And especially these two guys here, they've done it multiple times. But we also bring in an international mentor to kind of give that international flavor of providing mentorship back to the force. So we have these things going on across the world, especially in our geographic combatant command areas of responsibility. But it's all based on building teamwork and building trust. So there are some agreements that are made, you know, across the force here, and certainly with the one I spoke about in the George C. Marshall Center, but the majority of the time, it's coming together and building a team. Any of you guys want to comment on that?
Not so much.
How important do you think this will be going forward, that international piece?
It is absolutely crucial to providing global peace and security. When you talk about the strength of the United States, certainly our alliances and partnerships are one of the key strengths we have. And our participation in being a member of NATO and what we do in the Pacific and what we do in other areas in South America and Africa and places like that are huge in terms of not only the U.S. assisting with building capability and capacity in NCOs across these other nations, but more importantly, to showing that, as the United States, we want to be seen as that partner of choice globally. Go ahead, Scott. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, sir. Not so much on the education piece, but training is equally important here. And so I'll give you an operational vignette. Twice now, consecutive back-to-back years, Montenegro has asked us to send a team forward in support of our new DoD cyber strategy, which is hunt forward, to be where our adversaries are going to be. And so we have sent teams to Montenegro. We've sent teams globally to work specifically with the nation there, having that right next to your partner, your national partner. And as you know, NATO is the 29th member of NATO. Excuse me, Montenegro is the 29th country to join NATO. It's key that we work with them, because just like Russians are impacting our elections, they're doing the same thing there. And so often as we're hunting forward, we're learning new things about our adversaries, but we're also in concrete, in sync with our international partners. And that is another way, not just education, but also through sets and reps doing it real world.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, ma'am.
Quickly, so military officials have repeatedly said in the last year that the U.S. in recent years has fallen behind our adversaries in space as an emerging warfighting domain since the establishment of Space Command. Can you speak at all as to how that assessment may or may not have changed?
Yeah, so I don't remember hearing that. We are not behind. We absolutely are the leaders in space. That gap is closing faster than we would like, and these changes were specifically put in place to ensure that we maintain the advantage that we have and that we gain, quicker, and that we pull away, and that we do not allow any adversary to close. But make no mistake, we are the best in space, and we have not given that up, and we don't plan on giving it up anytime soon.
Okay. Did you have your hand up, sir?
Yeah. I had a question earlier, sir. When it comes to bringing in experience for Cyber Command, cyber forces, what is the difference between bringing in talent and experience that's great and training it from zero with perhaps enlisted forces? And then with that in mind, is there a benefit to having enlisted talent in the cyber force? Why not just have it be all civilian?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a 1-year-old daughter now who may actually be watching this, and she can get into my cell phone today. She has her own tablet, and so you're recruiting from a base of digital natives that really understand that have grown into this. When I joined the Corps, the internet did not exist. Now, obviously, everyone that's joining has been used to that, and so you start off with a baseline of experience from the get-go, and so that certainly leads into the talent we have. But we do have civilians in this domain as well, and we just implemented the Cyber Accepted Service, which allows civilians to stay in the cyber components, whether that's the services or it's Cyber Command headquarters, and they're focused specifically on this domain. And that's something we worked really hard on. So whether they're going to stay in uniform or they're going to come back to us as a civilian, those opportunities exist. On the retention side, we certainly would love to keep them in uniform a lot longer, hopefully grow into my position as a digital native. But the talent today, and Chief Master Sergeant Toberman really hit on this, is exponentially greater, and they're certainly a lot smarter, much more savvy. Oftentimes what you got to do is just unleash that talent and let it go.
We got time for one more slide.
Okay. I'm going to come to him, Megan, since he hasn't asked one. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Matt Baynard, Defense Daily. Actually, following up on that a bit, I was just curious, the ability to do offensive cyber, this new piece on defending forward, is that kind of a key kind of attribute to both retention and keeping people, this ability to do this cyber piece that you can't do in the private sector, defending forward and going into networks, doing offensive cyber? Has that been kind of a key piece?
So when it comes to offensive cyber, those are options that we provide to the geographic combatant commanders, and then if the SecDef authorizes it, we'll do such. But what I was speaking at specifically is defending, and defending our domains, because if we can't even do basic defense of our domains, if we don't have the ability to have command and control, then it's all for naught. And so we're primarily focused with our partners, specifically on the defense of our domains, hardening our infrastructure, and then getting back to those basic cyber hygiene practices that I spoke about earlier, which is really simple things. But if you do those simple things in cyber, more often than not, if you do those simple things in the ground component as well, it's going to lead to a hardening of your target and a lot of success. Offensive operations that we do, those come under the authority of the Secretary of Defense, and we provide those options as necessary.
Oh, all right. So as far as your recruiting campaigns, efforts, where are you going to? Are you going to high schools and universities? Are you going to certain high schools and universities? Because while I know the services do their own recruitment, it seems like for the specialized nature of space and cyber, it might help you guys out to have your own sort of precise recruiting campaigns within that structure.
So we have two things we're doing. I'm actually really excited. Gen Cyber is a global operation that we do where we go down to high schools, we go to different schools focusing on STEM. We had the opportunity to visit our local school in Fort Meade, and the students there would never have had the opportunity to do computer science, to do anything in the cyber world. Some of these students actually were homeless. Minorities, females, not giving natural opportunities, and so it was really great to spend some time with them, and we continue to do that in Gen Cyber. That is a program K through 12 that is throughout the nation, in DC and Puerto Rico as well. On the other side of that is our Cyber Academics Excellence kind of certification that NSA gives, and so we look at recruiting from those institutions that have defense or cyber operations as programs that NSA and Homeland Security has certified as legitimate programs, and we do an awful lot of recruiting from them. But more often than not, we have more people applying for jobs than we have jobs available. This is a world that we are not going to be able to hire our way out of. This is not a challenge that we're going to have that. We're going to have to rely on quantum computing. We're going to have to rely on artificial intelligence and all of those other tools that are available to us in order to have machines do a lot of the crunching of the information and humans working on the areas that the systems are telling us to. So yeah, it's really a great time with all the opportunities that are out there. Like I said, Gen Cyber and the Cyber Academic Centers of Excellence, the amount of people to pull from are really great.
Go ahead, Toby.
Yeah, so the services are, obviously all the services are taking it seriously and they're all moving out. In my other hat, in my Air Force Space Command hat, every single one of our space wings has community programs, and they're out there, they're in the schools, they're in the community, and they're doing a great job. It really is just getting out there and giving opportunity because there's so much excitement about space right now. And I think as long as you're available and you're present, there's a long, long line of talent waiting to get in. I called an astronaut when I was at a high school in Wisconsin. That was helpful for the kids.
Go ahead, Patrick. You get the last word.
Yes, man. I think from a service perspective, how they're looking at assessing talent is meaningful. But I also think from a joint perspective, there's the ability for us to, hey, we must build experts with cyber and space, et cetera, type capacity. But there's also a call for us to build cyber expertise across the force, to build this joint expertise, because it really is ultimately about joint combined arms. And so whether it's the art of deterrence or the art of war, it's how do we as a force, right, develop the expertise that we need so when it's time for planning, you understand these domains much better than we do now. And to Chief Toberman's part, like that young talent, that digital native, I mean, let's just face it, that cadre professional that comes in each and every week from where our services assess talent, they inherently are innovative, and they're getting and moving out. And so for us, as the warfighters presently serving, it's how do we build the expertise at the speed that we need to do.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much. As I mentioned before, it is absolutely imperative that we as senior enlisted leaders have a relationship with you all because, as I tell these guys all the time, somebody has to tell the young man and woman that's serving, especially an enlisted person, and that's what we're charged to do, is make sure we tell their story and that we get it right. So our relationship with you is important. So thank you all for taking time as we talked about these emerging domains today. Thank you very much.